Post-flowering care for your orchids. Here we have Phaius tankervilleae. It's really pretty much at the end of its flowering display, and we get a lot of people asking us what to do with our orchids when they finish flowering. When do we cut those flower spikes off, and what do we do with the plant? Well, this all starts with an initial inspection of your plant before you actually go into doing anything. Before you can make any decisions, you have to actually have a look at your plant and see what is going on, that you can come up with the right solution for your plant. So let's go in and have a look and see what's happening in here. Here we can see the media is already sunk in quite far down the pot. It's almost halfway down, so we know the media has started to decompose and probably compact. So that means we're going to need to repot this plant. We can see lots of small growth here happening, and some of that new growth happening that we expect to see after flowering. So that's always a good sign. We know that there's new roots going to be forming, those new pseudobulb growths are happening. So this is going to be the ideal point to repot this plant. So we see all these old dying leaves on the plant as well. But with something like Phaius, this is not something that we have to worry about, because their leaves only last for about a year and a half anyway. That's probably the maximum that you get out of their leaves. So we don't have to worry that these leaves are dying and yellowing, because we know all this new growth is going to take over from it quite quickly. So now that we need to know we've got a repot, let's remove it from the pot itself and see what we can do from there. So having done that basic inspection quick, we can tell that we need to repot. So let's get this baby out of this pot. And you may ask, why am I doing this when we still have some perfectly valid flowers still available on this plant? It's only on the one stem that we have a few buds still opening and some flowers that are still looking okay. But we can see the whole display is pretty much over. That's not really going to make too much difference to keeping a few flowers alive for a few extra weeks. And there's something special that we want to do with these flowerings, these old flowering spikes. And we'll get into that later in the video. Okay, let's see if we can take this out of the pot without causing too much damage. That way, what we've got to do is bang around the sides first, just to try and loosen up anything that may be holding onto the edge of the pot. We know the media is compacted slightly because it's sunk so deep. And these Phaius really like to have a well-drained media. So this was the perfect timing to actually get in and repot this, because the next season, I don't want to break those spikes off yet. The next season of growth might have been troublesome if we don't remove it now without getting enough drainage to the roots of these plants. Although they like a moist environment, they don't like to be damp and soggy. There we go. We can see how much moisture is being stuck at the bottom of this pot anyway as it is. So that would have slowly started to cause problems for the new root growth that's going to start happening now. These are quite vigorous growers, so they do need some size to the pot that you plant them into so that they can keep growing well. The roots of the plant can take up quite a bit of volume. This is all wet and soggy now, and just gently going around, pushing softly or gently against the soil just to loosen it up, because I don't want to break too many of the roots. We'll just do this section by section, and we can see how sticky and gooey this media has become, and this would have just rotted off all the roots if we had have kept this going in the same pot for longer. especially now we're going into rainy season. They're out in the open and this would just hold way too much moisture for them. So now already we can feel this plant is beginning to break off into different sections. Only way I'm going to be able to do this without causing too much damage is just slowly and remove these by bit. The one nice thing is we can see how nice and rich the soil is that's coming out, which is what they do like. They do like to grow in a media with a lot of food in them, but then as I said, they do need lots of drainage. So although this might have all the right nutrition, it's just not going to be the right texture. You could use a hose pipe at this point just to rinse it out, or to rinse out all the extra soil, which would be easier, but I can't get my hose pipe out here. I might just have to take this to a tap to put it under some running water, just to clean it up nicely. And here we can see where the plant is beginning to separate itself from each other. So what we'll just do is gently pull them apart, slowly, carefully. There we go. And we have two rather large sections. And at this point now, it's easy to get in and remove any of those leaf sheaths around, in and around the base, just to open up the air circulation, just to remove any dead dying material that could then possibly cause problems as the moisture levels start increasing and it may start to rot. And at this point too, I can get into that flower spike and cut it off right at the base down at the bottom over here. So of course, always good sanitized equipment, especially doing cuts near the base of your plant. We want to make sure that everything stays sterile. We just have to be a little bit careful. We have a new shoot growing right over here. So we want to get in and cut that off through there. There's a reason that I want to cut it off at its very full length, let alone not allowing excess material at the base here that can then rot later. But there's something special we're going to be doing with these. Now we can see our open wound that we now have on this orchid. There we go. That's where the cut has happened, and we have this big gaping open wound here that can allow an infection. So what we want to do is, while we've got this all open and it's clear and it's still a bit damp because it's the new fresh cut, what we want to do is take our trusty cinnamon and dust our cinnamon onto that point. There we go. I'm going to put some more on there. I want a fairly thick coating of it to ensure that it can desiccate the area out well and stop any fungal or bacterial infections that might want to creep in there. and it just makes it nice and easy to do while your plant is opened up like this and you can get in easily. So just remove some more of that debris in and around the plant. And yay, we can get and pull out some of those weeds that we have to keep trying to battle to pull out in between everything. Okay, let me just show you something that's happening here. We're getting a little bit of rot setting in. So this was lucky we got in now to do it and didn't leave it any longer. We can see in here as well a little bit of that bacterial rot that looks like it's getting in. So we're going to do something with this whole little section here. We can see how compact it is with lots of small growth, and we have some stronger growth this side here. So what we're going to do is we're going to remove this whole section over here with all of this massive amounts of small growth, and then we can clean this up nicely, pulling out any of this bacterial rot. We'll give this a spray with some hydrogen peroxide just to clean that off, and then we'll repot that section separately. We just got to find where all the back bulbs are joined in with each other. Okay, this whole section here is coming off. So it's just a matter of just slowly working, pulling gently, trying not to tear at the roots, so that you can see where the section actually comes from. And then you can go in with your secateurs and cut through the rhizome that joins those pseudobulbs together. Just to get in there and snip that off. And that way you can then just gently separate those sections. The roots are a little bit wound together, so we'll just gently work them loose. There we go, and that's our section that we're going to have to clean up nicely. Because there's not too much air movement happening through here, our mix was holding too much water and moisture, that we started getting a little bit of rot. Also, the fact that it was so deep into the pot already that it was limiting the air movement through. Okay, we have a little cut section there that we did to remove that piece, and we'll just again go with the cinnamon and seal that off. Try not to get too much cinnamon on the roots, but there we go. One little back bulb by itself. This you don't have to worry about too much because it will probably, especially at this time of year, send up a new little shoot somewhere and produce a little new pseudobulb growth. It's going to take a while for it to get to flowering size, but you're going to have an extra plant. And I want to make sure that I remove all of this media all the way up through to the base of the plant. This is because, as I was saying, it holds too much moisture, and if we're holding too much moisture right at the base, you're going to rot your roots off at the pseudobulbs or at the rhizome, and the rest of your roots might do well in the new media, but you've actually basically killed them by rotting them off at the base of the plant. Okay, we'll take these off to the running water now and give them a rinse through. And before we actually, let's rinse them through, because it's pointless putting the cinnamon on like I did over here before you've washed them, because you're going to wash that cinnamon off. So we're going to have to wash out these roots and then reapply the cinnamon. We go all nice and clean. We've rinsed out all the media from in between the roots now. We'll just go through, check whether there's any of these roots that need to be removed, that may be soggy and mushy, and then we'll just cut those off. We can see a lot of nice little new growth tips happening. See if we can get close here for you. All those nice, beautiful new growth tips. And again, you notice with terrestrial orchids, those growth tips are not green like you tend to see in some of those epiphytic plants. That's because they're not getting any sun down there and they're not expected to either. Okay, now let's just remove this old bottom leaf here so we can see what's happening with these flower spikes. Okay, we're lucky here, there's no new shoot in the way, so that's going to be easy to get in and just trim off. Again, I'm going to go right in at the base here and cut it off as close to the pseudobulb as possible. There we go. And a nice clean cut. Here we can see a new shoot happening at the base, so that's going to open up the space for that to shoot up nicely. We'll just go in again with our cinnamon and plaster that full. And then again with this one. Yeah, we've got to be a bit more careful. We have this shoot here, so we don't want to damage that. Here, a sharp knife would probably be easier to get in than having a little bit of a thickness of the secateurs. But if we just work gently and carefully, we should be able to get through. There we go. A little bit more of a vicious cut there, but again, as long as we get in with our cinnamon and treat that, it's all going to be okay. And remember, with these being ground orchids, that doesn't mean you planting these pseudobulbs below the ground. The pseudobulbs are still above the ground. It's only the roots that are in the ground. So although this had sunk deeper into the pot, all of these pseudobulbs were still above soil level. So you don't want to go changing the level of your plant. You've got to plant it to pretty much the same level it was originally. Not meaning inside the pot, but the soil level. Okay, that's all looking good. We can see those new root growths happening here on that pseudobulb, which is exactly what we want to see. We can, at this point, if we want to, come in and cut off all this old leaf volume. But often I'll leave it until they die off by themselves. It's still supplying some photosynthesis area for the plant to increase the amount of food it can make for itself while the new growth is happening. But these leaves won't last terribly much longer. As you can see, they really are starting to look tatty. So if you want to clean up your plant, you can remove them now. And here again with this plant, we're going to have to go back in and top up that cinnamon that we washed off. Okay, there we go. Now, let's just remove these old roots here and then get to the repotting and the media that I use to plot my Phaius in. You really don't have to be gentle at this point cutting back these roots. You can go through and cut back all this old volume at the back. I tend to just leave it on, just cutting off the old squishy bits, because invariably these older roots are going to die at some point anyway, and all the new growth is going to produce new roots, so you can remove them off now. What I'm going to be doing here is I'm going to be planting these two large pieces back into the same pot that I originally had removed them from, and then this large set of small offshoots I'm going to plant up separately. These two pieces, if you wanted to, you could very easily repot them into individual pots this size, and they will still grow beautifully and fill out well. But I don't have too much space for too many more pots. We're going to try and make a nice, great big giant display, which means we're going to have to repot this again probably next year, or if I can get away with it, the following. Okay, let's have a look at some of those ingredients that I'm going to be using. This is probably one of the fanciest, the most advanced. This is probably one of the busiest mixers I use for some of my orchids. It's several components, but as I go through, I'll explain why I use each of these components and why I don't possibly use something else. Here we have bark chaff. It's just these fine powdered bark, basically. It's just basically waste product, really, from when they're sieving out bark for orchid bark and landscaping bark extra. And this is just like the powdery stuff left over behind. And I often find this at the bottom of my packets of bark, so I just save it up and I can use it for things like my Phaius. Then, of course, charcoal. Such a wonderful inorganic media. It's going to help the soil from souring. It's going to help bind toxins, and it's going to help give aeration to the mix. And then we have a good quality potting media or compost, a well composted compost. This is one of the bark composts, and it's going to be ideal because it already has some nice barky chunks to it. And river sand. We want a nice coarse river sand that's going to allow for fast drainage, and we're going to be adding this to the mix to give some volume that's not going to hold too much moisture. And then, of course, some half decomposing bark. This is often used as a garden mulch and stuff like that. It's generally pretty inexpensive because there's not much else you can do with it, but it makes an excellent additive to terrestrial orchid mixes. For one, it's going to help feed the plant as it decomposes, but it's also going to supply aeration and like a lightness to the media. And now it's just a matter of taking all of those ingredients together, making a big bowl of broth. So what we're going to do is take one part of that river sand, one part of that well composted compost, one part of the bark chaff, and one part of our unsifted mixed quality bark that's often used as mulch. And 1 part of charcoal. The wonderful thing about using charcoal like this is you're not going to have to worry that they small or chunky. You can just use a mix of different sizes and just pop that in. And then we're just going to mix that all together. A lot of people use peat in their mixes with things like Phaius. For me, because I grow outdoors, and it's probably because I'm lazy at watering or I don't water consistently. And I find the problem, what happens with peat is once peat dries out, it becomes hydrophobic. It doesn't like to become wet again. So it will tend to congregate in clumps in and around your media, and those clumps will stay dry even if you start watering again. And that just can cause inconsistencies in the dampness of your media right the way through. But if you're more consistent at watering and make sure you don't allow your pots to dry out completely, then peat can be an excellent added media to use with things like Phaius. Remember, peat can be acidic, so that can also start causing problems. Although your bark chaff is also going to be slightly acidic, we have the charcoal, which is going to overcome any of that. And remember, with these mixes, they do tend to decompose relatively quickly. That's why you get that sinkage in your pot, and that's why you do need to repot these sorts of terrestrial orchids relatively frequently. As the decomposition happens, you'll end up holding too much moisture. The soil also acidifies, and then you start getting all sorts of problems with your orchid. So if you're looking to get your orchids to last longer in a pot without needing to repot so frequently, then you may want to use more river sand and potting soil and things like your charcoal, and avoid the decomposition that's going to happen with the bark chunks. Although I just like to use those bark chunks, they help in producing a structure in the soil that's going to allow for air movement. What we're going to do is just pop some charcoal pieces at the bottom of this pot just to cover those holes so that any of the sand, river sand, is not just going to go running straight through. And then we'll just fill that in. So we're just going to fill that in till we get to the depth that the roots are going to hang loose into the pot, and that will allow your orchid then to be at the right height that you want it to be at the pot. And okay, let's get the one side in first so we can get in some of that soil around the outer edge. And when filling in around these orchids, remember to repot it to the same height that it was originally at soil level, and cover all the roots with soil, because the roots will dry out. These are terrestrial orchids, and if you allow too much of those roots to be visible above the soil level, what you can end up doing is just drying them out at the base, and then that will slowly kill your whole root off. So just cover them all up nicely without sinking those pseudobulbs into the soil. Then what we can do is just give it a little shake around, settle some of that sand and media in between those roots. Okay, I'm going to need to make up a little bit extra just to fill in around the top here. So remember, with these, I'm not going in and compacting the media in around the base. I'm just shaking to settle the sand in so that the plant can be firmly in position so that it's not going to wobble too much, especially when we've got wind like this. Although the one nice thing about using the charcoal and the bark is if you do press down a bit, it's not going to make too much difference because you can't compact them too far. They sort of hold the structure in the soil to a degree, but you really don't want to be pushing in hard around there, especially if you're using something like peat again, where you can cause compaction there. Also, you'll notice as you shake your pot, some of the finer media will be shaken out and go in between those roots, whereas often your thicker, heavier, or your thicker, bigger chunks will stay at the top. But remember, as you're pouring in, you'd mixed your media all the way through, so there are still those big pieces and chunks in the middle of the media. It's just the finer chunks have helped fill up those air gaps between the roots of the plant so that they can still get enough moisture. And there we go, all repotted and ready for action again. Remember, this is just finished flowering, which means spring is already in the air. We've got those new growths happening, and we saw those new roots forming from the bases of those new growths. We saw all those new root tips growing off the end of the roots. So we know it's the ideal point to get this repotted now. And it probably will barely even notice that it was. And now, what are we going to do with these babies? Why did we remove them off, even if we still had some flowers on the way? We'll have to leave this to a new video because this took way longer than what I was expecting. I think I talked too much. So for now, we've managed to save this orchid because we did notice some problems coming, and that we're going to clean up and treat. This I'm going to be putting into a small little pot just to allow it to grow on. In the next video, I'll be showing you what is so special about these flower spikes. And if you have any other terrestrial orchids and want to know what to do with them, remember to check out that Buy Me a Coffee link. Ed posts up a lot of articles there, all orchid related, all the time. So that is a wonderful go-to resource for you in case you want to ask any questions about orchids and orchid growing. And thank you for watching. If you found any of this information helpful, please hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, bing bong, to be notified of all our upcoming content so you don't miss out on a thing. Help us grow as we help your orchids grow.